My name is Bill Buskist. I'm from Colorado in the United States. This is my 14th or 15th time to come to Saudi Arabia. My second time here at King Faisal University. Faisal? Okay. I can never get that one right for some reason. Just cannot get it right. Very bad with names. Most of my time has been spent in Riyadh at King Saud. I spent 6 months there on sabbatical, enjoyed it very much. I love coming to the Middle East. Really enjoy the culture, enjoy the people, and I really, really love your food. So we just don't get food like this back in the U.S., so it's wonderful to be here. You have a couple of handouts. One is the PowerPoint slides. You should all have a copy of that. Make sure you have a copy of that. You can follow along. And then another set of handouts, and you should have a big copy like this. If you don't have a big copy, could you raise your hand? Does everybody have a big copy? We're going to be using that during the last third of the workshop. I didn't want to take a lot of time telling you a lot about me, so on page 2 of the big handout, I've sort of given you a short biography of my professional life. A little bit about me personally. I've recently retired from Auburn University in Alabama, United States. I was there for 34 years. My specialty is teaching, particularly trying to understand what makes an excellent teacher. And you're going to find in part of my presentation today, we're going to talk about excellence in teaching. What I want to do today is I want to introduce you to project-based learning, but I want to take the long way to do that. Because I want you to realize that teaching is more than having a technique to teach with. That what's really most important about teaching is not the technique you're using, but who you are as a human being and what kind of strengths, personal strengths, you bring to the classroom with you. So we're going to spend some time building up to the project-based learning. Project-based learning is pretty simple. We don't need a lot of time to do it. So I really wanted to give you some good background information. So, everybody okay with that? Are you okay? Okay. All of you are familiar with the schedules, but I want to remind you to remind me, because I will forget. Once I start talking, I get really excited about things. I just sort of lose track where I am, and I'll lose track of time. So I want you to remind me at 10 o'clock, throw a pencil at me, throw the handouts at me, throw a purse at me, it does not matter. Just give my attention so we make sure we break on time. Okay? The same thing again when we take the longer break for prayer and for lunch. Okay? So make sure you get my attention, because I will go over. What we're going to do today, to start with, is we're going to review some basic ideas about teaching. And as we do this review, I'm going to break you into groups for discussion. I want you to sort of talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll come back as a larger group and we'll answer those questions that I ask you. Okay? So we're going to review a few things about teaching in general to begin with. Then we're going to introduce you to the basic principles of problem-based teaching. There's going to be several basic ground rules that we'll cover. Then there's sort of a series of steps that we'll go over how to introduce and how to create problem-based type of teaching in your class. And then we'll actually have you do some of that. Let me begin with a quotation. I always like to start my talks with a quotation so that you sort of get the frame of mind that I'm coming from. This quotation comes from a man by the name of Parker Palmer. And Parker Palmer is a very well-known American educator. He focused on adult education. He wrote a book about 20 years ago now that's still very, very famous, called The Courage to Teach. Sort of an unusual title, but when you think about it, to teach well, to really affect the lives of your students, it takes a lot of courage, because you have to be different. You have to be willing to challenge your students. You have to be willing to really put yourself on the line, personally and professionally, to do the kind of job that's required to become an excellent teacher. Anyway, one line in the book really stood out to me, and that is this: good teaching cannot be reduced to technique. In other words, to be a good teacher, you have to have more than a technique. He says good teaching is related to the identity and the integrity of a teacher, who you are as a human being. What kind of values you as a person bring to the classroom. When you're a teacher, you're on display to the public. Everybody can see you. Students watch your words, they listen to your words, and they watch your actions. They see how you interact with them. You are a role model for them. And they pay attention to that. And that's what they will remember about your class. They're not going to remember that you used active learning, or that you used problem-based learning, or that you used any kind of tutorial. They're going to remember the learning experience you created for them. They're going to remember that experience. Long after all those facts are gone out of their minds, they're going to remember you and the kind of person you were and the kind of example that you set. That's why a great teacher is someone who's inspirational. Not just motivation, but somebody who's an inspiration, somebody who can actually change the lives of their students, change the direction, change their values. These are very, very important things that we can do as a teacher. Our most important impact on students is influence. And that comes from who we are deep down in our hearts. Students are looking for individuals who are authentic, people who are genuine, people who aren't just putting on an act. They are very sensitive to the sincerity of who we are as teachers. So thank you for that. So let me start with a small group activity. We'll take about 5-6 minutes for this. I want you to ask yourself, in your classes, what kind of skills, particularly cognitive skills, do you want your students to come away with your class? Okay? In other words, when you think about what you want to teach them beyond content, what kind of skills do you want them to learn in your classes? What kind of thinking skills? So what I thought we'd do is sort of just make a list of the kinds of thinking skills we like to have our students end our course with. Our students should begin our course one way and end the course a different way. In other words, there should be some difference in how our students think between the start of the semester and the end of the semester if we've been successful. Okay. So what I like to do is go from one side to the other. So we'll take one response here, go back and forth. We'll do that for a couple of minutes, just to make a short list of 5 or 6 items, okay? Okay, I'm going to call that creative, because we're going to use that term later on, but it means the same thing. Okay. Yeah, we should teach students to be sort of broad-minded and think broadly what they're doing so they can take what information we give them to create new information. And that's one of the reasons why we became academics, right? Because we were very interested in the generation of new knowledge. So what we're talking about here is hierarchical thinking. That we want our students to be able to do a variety of different things, from basic remembering, which is the most common form of learning, all the way to being creative. So we want to teach them hierarchical skills. Okay, very good. Absolutely. So basic understanding. Yes. Yeah, that's an essential skill. Very good. So this is a good list, and it looks a lot like Bloom's taxonomy. Now notice during all of this conversation we've had, nobody really focused on content. Okay? So these are skills that we hope our students learn while we're teaching content. Okay. Why is that important? Anybody have a clue? Why is that important? Why is it important to have these skills in addition to content? In other words, when we teach, most of the time what we're doing is very, very interesting. We're using content as an excuse or as a vehicle to teach these skills. This is what we're really after. Okay? Because down the road, content does not matter. Why? Because content changes. Think about each of your fields. Think about how quickly new information is out there, which makes some of the old information no longer true or no longer useful. Okay? If you haven't taught your students to think like this, to develop these skills, they're not going to be able to understand that new knowledge. They're not going to be able to generate new knowledge. So as teachers, this is what we're really after. So when you think about doing your learning objectives for a class, your student learning objectives, think in these terms, not just content. The techniques that we talk about broadly as active learning, that's what we're trying to do. So that leads me to my next question, which is really not going to be more of a large class activity. What does the lecture accomplish? What do we accomplish when we lecture? Basically one thing. Delivery of content. Yeah, delivery of content. Dissemination of information. Yeah, and it's a very efficient means to do that. Okay. Students can do some reading. They come into class. You reinforce that reading. Maybe you extend it with new information. But the lecture is basically a means for telling people stuff. That's all it does. Now, that's what most of us do. Okay? But the really, really, really good lecture does something else.
Stimulate the learning.
Exactly.
Motivation.
Exactly. Perfect. They're inspirational. A great lecture is inspirational. You come away with like, wow, that is so interesting. I never knew that before. I want to learn more. Unfortunately, most of us are not master lecturers.
The style of teaching as well.
Pardon?
The style of teaching as well.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and some are better than others. Some have more effective styles than others. But most of us are not master lecturers. And that's why there's been such an emphasis in higher education in the last 20, 30, 35 years on active learning. Because what we do know is that when we compare any means of active learning to the lecture and what students learn, what they remember, the kind of thinking skills they develop, all these methods of active learning are far superior. So I want to sort of drive that point home right away. But I do not want to malign the lecture because it is an important way of delivering information. Most of my classes are taught purely active learning with this much lecture. This much lecture. When we go back to that first slide, maybe. That's what my class looks like. My students are always working on problems. So I use primarily problem-based learning in my class and a little bit of project-based learning. But my kids are always busy. And what I do at the end of class, I take about 10, 15 minutes, and as I've gone around the class and listen to what they're saying in their problem solving, I use that time to clarify misunderstandings or questions that they might have. But I lecture very little. I don't even use PowerPoint. My classes are a PowerPoint-free zone. And the point I'm making is that if you really want to teach these things, the lecture is not the best method to use. If you're purely about dissemination of information, then yeah, that's a good method. Way in the back real loud so I can hear.
I want to know how many students are in your class where you are putting this sort of
Okay, my typical class is between 40 and 80, but even in classes that I teach that are 250 to 300, I use active learning methods and very little lecture. Now, it took me a long time to learn how to do that. I made a lot of mistakes. But I finally got it down where I was really, really comfortable with it, and the students were really enjoying it and learning a lot as well. So, sir?
Don't you think also depend on the content that you're delivering? Like if the students come in the first year and they are just learning the information right now, can you really do this kind of activity? Like these are definitions and those things they're learning in the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hold that thought for just a minute, okay? Hold that thought for just a minute.